There are no apologies, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Is there any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you. We move to the minute of the executive held on the 16th of April. Are we content to agree that as a 2-minute?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything by way of matter arising that's not within the action log? No, I see no hands. Okay, we'll move on to the rolling action log and I'll go to Mr. Moody.
Thank you, Convener. And as usual, the rolling action log records decisions of the executive where those require a report back to the executive. There are comments where there is progress being made or not being made in relation to the recorded action, and the rolling action log is up to date as far as I can see, and it is available for members' questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moody, are there any questions in relation to the rolling action log? No. Okay, thank you. We move into our agenda proper, and the first item is building a fairer Falkirk, Falkirk's anti-poverty strategy. And Karen, or it's Sally that's going to take this item. Morning, Sally, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm Sally Buchanan, the Library Services and Fairer Falkirk Manager. The report you have in front of you this morning seeks approval for our new anti-poverty strategy. And the strategy sets out a vision where we tackle poverty by maximising household income with a focus on 3 areas: information, employment and transport. The strategy very much builds on our previous work to tackle poverty, and section 4.4 of the cover report highlights some of the impact that we have had over the past year. The strategy in front of you was developed following extensive engagement with our communities and with people who support people in or at risk of poverty. And our 3 areas of focus were developed very much based on what we heard during those conversations. The appendix at the end of the strategy sets out our high-level plan of what we will do to achieve our vision, and we will develop that plan in more detail following approval of the strategy. We have committed to reporting back to Executive on an annual basis to show our progress over the past year and to update our actions in terms of what we will do going forward for the following year. I'd like to point out that I truly believe that achieving this vision will require commitment from across all council services and actually wider, ideally across our community planning partnership too, to allow us to maximise the impact that we can have. And assuming that this strategy is approved by the Executive today, we plan to take it to the Community Planning Partnership Board in June for their consideration. I'd like to just say thank you to Richard McFarlane and the Fairer Falkirk team for all their hard work in developing this strategy and the time that they put into the engagement to inform the strategy. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for that, Sally. This is a strategy that we would never want to have in front of us, and for it not to have to be in an agenda, but it's a reflection of the pressures impacting on society. Some are global factors, others are manufactured as a result of national political choices, including some from benefits not keeping pace with rising cost of living, slow growth in wages, high energy and housing costs. Many of those policy levers that could make a significant impact to alleviate and support and eradicate poverty are retained with the UK government. With continued pressure on public finances and no clear indication of the progressive policy changes, it's anticipated that it will continue to be need to prioritise support for those that are most impacted the most. There has been at Scottish Government level significant resource directed to help alleviate the impacts of poverty, including the bedroom tax and the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment and more. Reducing the impacts of poverty, recognising that we alone cannot eradicate it, is a key priority within the Falkirk Council plan, and the poverty strategy has been born out of the work previously through towards a fairer Falkirk and the income maximisation strategy, both of which have had a positive impact on households who are experiencing poverty. We've seen the increase in the uptake of council tax reduction, which as a council council, we have one of the highest increase in claims. There's also been an increase in the uptake of entitled benefits, bringing in an additional 7.2 million to households, and an increased uptake of free period products. There's also been an extensive rollout to staff of the Think Poverty awareness sessions to help encourage focus on how services are designed and be able to deliver that support and advice at the front line. It's very frustrating that despite such efforts, that poverty in Falkirk and indeed nationally remains stubbornly high. There's been a lot of research to identify those who are impacted the most, as poverty does not impact everyone the same. But what we do know is that households with children are more likely to be more affected. Similarly, those who are in work, live alone, and single-person households are more at risk of experiencing poverty. It's anticipated that the number of single households are likely to increase along with an ageing population. This is likely to face further pressure on public services with limited supports available to them. In developing the strategy, there's been extensive public engagement which identify key areas that have been seen as a barrier: exclusion, trust, stigma, awareness and transport. This was then developed with our engagement team for taking people's life experiences and to look at possible solutions. The strategy, and particularly the themes of income maximisation, employability and transport, are based on extensive engagement, and that was what was important to the people that were spoken to. It builds on a lot of good work. We are limited to what we can do to tackle poverty, and the strategy is set against a backdrop of poverty may increase due to the rising cost of living and global factors, including war and climate change, as well as decreasing public sector budgets. This means that it's more important that we look across all our services to see what we can do within them to support people at risk of poverty. And that's why in the plan, that's why the plan is going to go to the Community Planning Partnership following the executive in order to maximise the impact by extending across the partners. A lot of good work's already going on around income maximisation and employability, but transport's harder with a lot of complexity, and that is a very costly issue to resolve. Given our engagement clearly highlighted how important it is, we do need to look at what can be done, and particularly where services are at risk of cuts, and we need to know how we can mitigate the impact of these cuts on people at risk of poverty. So it's been acknowledged that the council cannot deliver the solutions on its own, and that's why we need to reach out to our partners and the third sector and looking to deliver a comprehensive package. Addressing the impact of poverty will remain one of the council's key priorities, and we'll seek wherever possible to continue to influence national policy areas. I'm happy to move the report, and again we give my thanks to the team for all their work in developing the strategy, but also those on the front line that are delivering those very vital services to our communities. Councillor Bice.
Thank you, Convener. Can agree with just about every word you said there. It was very well presented. It's very concerning that 39% of people in Falkirk don't know that there's a potential to help them with money matters. I see people at my surgery every week, and I'll use an example, but there will be no names, as people quite aware. And a person came to see me about they were struggling with money matters, and the person pulled into himself and became very quiet and their head down, and the stigma that that person displayed at that point asking for help was actually heartbreaking. She came back to see me recently and has thanked me for the help that the Revenue and Benefits Department of Falkirk Council who have managed to help this person and sort out a lot of the problems in their life. To that, Sally, can you make sure that's passed on to the team and Revenue Benefits? Not always the best name, Revenue Benefits, maybe Revenue Support Team probably could be a better name for it, but it's a typical example that I'm sure most of us as councillors have came across, and we've all seen the stigma which people display at that time. The big thing that's in the report, it talks about we can change this, we have to change it, and I do like what we're doing, using our partners in it. As Falkirk Council cannot do it on its own. We have to work with our partners very strongly in this to make sure that we can do the best for our people. With that, I'll keep it simple and gratefully second the Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. I'll now open it up for questions or comments. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. I tend to agree with you, Convener. This document before us is one sad and sorry read. Some of the highlighted figures, like 1 in 4 children in the Falkirk area live in poverty. I know their parents are trying to work. I know their parents want them to go to school. But parents have to go to work as well. So I'll only hint on the present petition that's ongoing against us altering the school hours, which is of no help to parents at all. 57% of adults in poverty in Scotland are in working households. I can verify that working in a food bank. If you've got 3 kids, a mortgage and a car, and you're working, which one do you give up? I know there's not a lot we can do as a council, but publishing reports is one thing, and it's an easy thing. Actually physically doing something is something completely different. But my real question today is the impact on climate change targets that you've put in. I know there's to be a major announcement by INEOS and Petro INEOS at 11 o'clock today regarding Grangemouth. I am of the understanding that it's not all bad news, but it will impact greatly on our area, not just Grangemouth, not just Falkirk District, but the whole of Scotland. So can I ask what we're actually doing to help people that's going to be impacted by climate change? And by that I mean, don't just tell them to buy an electric car. Not everybody gets a car for nothing. How do they afford these things? What practically are we going to do to help people to implement the press for carbon zero?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kirchick, do you want to make comment on that?
Thank you, Convener. The council has set out its zero carbon ambitions. We are progressing with our local heat and energy efficiency strategies, which includes aspects for place-based, locally led and a tailored approach to heating, which includes tackling elements of poverty within there. We'll continue to progress that work, and there will be reports coming back to the members on the progress of that. There is also, as you will be aware, the EcoFlex initiative that's run by the UK government, and that's where you're probably.
Yeah, I did want to go to council. Not a response to it.
There's an update report planned for the next council executive on the EcoFlex programme.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Especially looking at this report, I think as a councillor, but also previously as an activist around issues in housing, I think the heartbreaking impacts of poverty have been aggravated in the last few years, especially by the world-beating UK levels of inflation caused by the Tory government utterly mismanaging the economy. It's very poor to see the disproportionate impact this is having on the younger generation with less jobs and less access to housing and costs getting higher and higher. I think I'm just going to ask a couple of questions in relation to the report. The first one's at 4.4, in which illustrates that clients gain benefits of 7.2 million directly through the Community Advice Service. We're benchmarking for the council tax reduction scheme. Do we have any benchmarking for this particular statistic? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sally?
Yeah, thank you very much. In terms of our client gain, if I compare that to the client gain across Scotland, for example, what we have brought in across both council services and community, the Citizens Advice Bureaus in terms of financial gain for the Falkirk area represents 4.5% of the total financial gain across Scotland, which given our population represents around 2.9%, shows I think that we're pulling in more than you would expect for our population, which I think is great news. Looking at the debt, we actually are managing at 6.2% of Scotland's debt, again through our in-house services in the 3 area citizens advice bureaus. So again, pulling in more than our share across Scotland, which I think again just reflects the really great work that's going on at the front line. That said, I still think there's more we can do to make sure that we're reaching, to make sure that everyone is aware of those services and that people who, you know, who really need that support are able to get it and aware that it's there.
Thank you very much. I think it shows the benefit when we can deliver locally, and hopefully that's reflected in the next budget deliberations at a Scottish national level. I'm going to go to the point about transport, and the priority is transport is affordable, available and convenient. I know that this is a priority for our residents, especially as we've seen such a dramatic decline in bus routes in Scotland and across the UK over the last 15-20 years. The financial pressures on local government caused by underfunding are well known, but I know that other local authorities are exploring options to secure a positive change in our bus services. Especially in our rural and villages, it's of critical importance in ending poverty and especially enabling access to public services and employment. The question is, how is this strategy going to be used to look at the prioritising the bus routes that we subsidise, and especially the times that those buses service villages and outlying rural areas? It's especially a point that does come up quite frequently in relation to the subsidised bus services. Couldn't there be another time to make sure I can make my work?
Okay, I think the Chief Exec's going to take that question first, and I think maybe Karen's got something to add. Or
Thank you, Convener. So I think there's two things I want to say in relation to this. The first one, relating to local transport strategy, some of the work that's we're looking at, some of the innovative work round about, for example, demand responsive solutions. I think we need to continue to pursue that. And even as a as a management team, when we saw the results of the work being done here and the fact that poverty or transport was such a major issue of concern, I think we also need to look more widely than that. And so the other thing that is very much on our agenda now is perhaps looking at a wider kind of transformational review of our own transport services as a council. So at the moment, and this is not unusual, but they run on a kind of service by service basis. And we feel there's perhaps an opportunity to give some wider consideration to look at transport cross services, how we make better use of our fleet and vehicles, and whether there might be some opportunities to create capacity, which may then help provide solutions for communities as well. Now, this works at a really early stage. But I think that whilst inevitably we're looking at transformation right across the council, not least because of the need to drive savings, we felt there's perhaps also a benefit in looking at this, and it might help us provide better transport solutions for the public as well. So it's at an early stage, but I just thought it was worth mentioning in the context of your question.
I'm sure there'll be ongoing questions in relation to that work. No further questions, Convener. Thank you.
I think just on that, Karen maybe had something she wanted to add.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, as Sally said, this is about us working right across the council. Chief Executives referred to that as well, but it's also about us working with our partners, with the third sector. So when we're looking at our transport internally, it's also about us then working with third sector and partners about how we utilise that to best ability with their support. So this isn't going to be a council only fix. We need to make sure that we involve all of our partners to do that, to make sure that we address some of the issues that Sally's outlined in the report.
Okay, I've got Councillor Murtagh. Sorry, excuse me.
Thanks, Convener. I think, first of all, I'd like to absolutely pay tribute to the team in income maximisation. And I think, as Councillor Bowes was saying, and others I've experienced as well, just how impactful that their advice and some of the creativity around how they're able to potentially, they're faced with one issue that they're inquired about, but actually dig in and find other ways to support. I think that from constituents has come back, that some of that has really helped the life experience of our constituents, and I think that is a fantastic. It's a shame that they're so busy and that we have this issue, but they are making a real difference, and I think that needs to be applauded and put back to them. I think that you mentioned, Sally, within your presentation and again, the Chief Executive and Karen have just said there about how we work across the council and again with our partners. And I know that one of the frustrations, and particularly from an equality and human rights perspective, is in how we develop policy, and that all these policies which fit into our strategies and our plans, and that instead of where we had been in the past, and let's say that we're not there at the moment, although I'm not sure about that, in terms of looking at the equality and poverty impact after we've developed a policy, that actually what we should be doing is embedding that as we develop even the concept of the policy and go through that. And I know that we've spoken about that internally, but I think that it's important potentially to speak about that this morning and to recognise that we do have a long way to go in terms of understanding how the policies that we develop within the council that go out to affect our constituents actually are looking at the poverty impact, rather than, you know, at the far end of it. I don't know whether you could comment on that, Sally, in terms of some of the discussions we've had, and how. Sorry, I'm getting feedback that I can't. Apologies, Convener, when you speak on the thing that's picking it up on the microphone, so I can't hear. So I'll just say that if I could ask Sally, in terms of as a council overall, when we're developing policy in terms of our policy strategy, where we are with that kind of development of policy and how it fits in with our poverty strategy.
Apologies, Councillor Murtagh, I was just checking that Sally was going to be the right officer to respond to your question, but I'll go to Sally.
Thank you for that. What I would say is that I think this comes back to the Think Poverty training that we've mentioned in the report, which is very much trying to raise awareness of the support that is out there, but also of the need to exactly do, as you say, of looking at, you know, how we can best support people in poverty across everything that we do. I think there's a much improved understanding of that, and essentially that's the Fairer Scotland duty. And we've had some really good conversations at sort of all levels of the council recently about how we really need to do that. And I think for me, you know, as we are looking at the need for savings, it just becomes all the more imperative that we are absolutely, I don't like the word lens, but I'm trying to think of a better one. I haven't come up with it yet, but looking at everything we're doing through that lens, engaging with people who are at risk of poverty or living on a low income, to get their thoughts about how we can make sure that we are mitigating cuts, that we are really maximising that impact for those who really need the support most. So, you know, I think that's the purpose of the equality and poverty impact assessments. That's why we have the P in there. And I think both the Think Poverty training and the recent equalities training have both raised awareness of that poverty element to that and the Fairer Scotland duty, and the need to build that in to conversations early on, as you highlight.
Thanks, Sally, and your question, Convener. I think that one of the things, and I think Councillor Steinbach alluded to a little bit there, in terms of when we're looking at policies and how they fit in overall, in the overall picture of everything we do in the council, because everything is interlinked. And, you know, certainly my frustration in terms of how, when we develop policy, and transport is a perfect example, where if you develop a policy which says we cannot, as a council, afford to provide, you know, extra buses or, you know, or fund buses at all, and that will have an impact on the income ability of our constituents and their ability to get to the doctors, etc. And we look at that from a, you know, we cannot fund that, but it's got a poverty impact. And then at the same time, we have decisions about council tax, which is also a budget balancing measure, where we're saying, well, OK, those very people will have to pay several times more than what they would in a council tax increase. And, you know, and how the debates fit about that. And I think where my frustration often comes in is that we don't necessarily have all the evidence before us as councillors cumulatively to look at policy A will be harmful to somebody in poverty here, but policy B will be, you know, beneficial, and weigh those up. And I think, you know, Councillor Spears mentioned that the current situation with the, you know, the school hours debate, and there's another example where we're saying, you know, the debate about we have to balance the budget, and here is the equality and poverty impact of that will be in our constituents, but actually what they could potentially be asked to pay in one and another guise would be far more than what would be to fund the policy from a council tax increase. And I think sometimes we don't have all that information before us as councillors, and that there's not that early development either within the quality and poverty impact assessments to enable those sorts of quality assessments at the time that we're making them. And I think that's somewhere where we really do have to improve as a council in understanding not just the crude measurement of how we can save money in one area, but actually it's going to impact much more on the very people who we're saying we're trying to help. So I echo your comments about joined up thinking and collaborative working across the council and with our partners. I think that's something we need to do more work on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Bundy and then it'll be Councillor Nimmo.
Thank you, Convener. I wanted to begin by just agreeing with Councillor Spears when he said that a report is a report and it's only a report. It's very important that we take this document and put it into action, and as Councillor Murchie said, use the contents of this report to shape the policies of the council as we go forward. The contents of this report highlighted 3 key themes to try and tackle poverty in the Falkirk area. These were information, employment and transport. I would like to suggest another 2 to add to this strategy. The first one of these is housing. The council is doing a lot of work in housing, very good work, improving the energy efficiency of housing. This not only helps the council meet the net zero targets of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but it also helps reduce the cost of energy bills because less energy is being used. Housing for many people is where they socialise. We have a lot of isolation in Falkirk and throughout Scotland, and housing is a place where people should be taking pride of. So when we're doing retrofitting as well as energy efficiency, we should be looking at working with people to make sure that they take pride in their housing in areas of beauty and aesthetics. And that is something on top of material poverty. We also have mental poverty, and mental health is so closely linked with material poverty. And then on top of that, and we talked about isolation, the Centre of Social Justice in their report about poverty highlighted isolation as one of the greatest pathways to poverty. And we see that through family breakdown and the breakdown of many community groups in our society. And it's very disheartening when you go and see people who come to surgeries, or even relatives who you have to go and visit them to be the person that they've met because maybe their church is no longer in operation, or the group that they went to on a Tuesday morning is no longer running. And building a support network is also a way to tackle poverty. Again, mental poverty, but also material poverty. And we do talk about employment, but there is a saying that says about 80% of jobs come because of who you know rather than what you know. Well, building a network is a way to help people get into employment and work their way up the employment chain. So, yeah, good housing that people can take pride of, housing that is energy efficient to reduce the cost of energy, but also creating these networks so people can overcome social isolation and then build those networks that help get into jobs. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bundy. Sally, do you want, I mean, my understanding is housing was intrinsic within the poverty strategy anyway, but I take the point of it being very much to the forefront, but also around that networking and a lot of what's happening, particularly through our libraries, etc., around exactly that. So I don't know if you just want to say that while that is coming in from a different strand, it does have an impact on the poverty strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just offer reassurance that I think we've actually got much better links in with housing just now, and indeed there's quite a lot of anti-poverty actions within our local housing strategy now, and those linkages are made as we look to how we deliver this strategy and make sure that, as a few people have said, that it is not just a document, but it is a set of actions. We're looking at a kind of group of officers who will be kind of those key leads around bringing this together, delivering the actions. And very much a discussion I had just before the meeting today is about housing being, you know, a key player at that and having a seat at the table in that, the kind of officers group. So I guess, yes, I think housing is absolutely front and centre of this and key. And I think we have now much better linkages between the two strategies. And I guess it's just being careful not to end up duplicating, you know, one strategy with another and trying to keep things simple.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Nimmo and then Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. We've been asked to approve the anti-poverty strategy this morning. A laudable thing to have, but I think you really need to take it in context. There's a danger here, and a significant danger, that this could just end up as a tick box exercise. We need to take in the impact of the SPR with the potential closure of facilities. That's going to adversely affect the vulnerable people in our society. The 20-minute neighbourhoods, we've already spoken about the transport implications. Now, there's a very small paragraph on page 17 at 5.2. There's only about 3 or 4 lines. But as the Chief Executive has already said, this is a major issue of concern, and yet there's very little detail contained in the report regarding the transport aspects. I'm just wondering if officers could maybe comment a bit further on the implications.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. The transport part, whilst it's only covered in 5.2, there is a section within the actual strategy itself which sets out what communities have said to us in terms of transport. I think it's also worth saying that whilst that's what's been said, and there is indications within the strategy about the approach we will then take to tackle that, as we've said earlier, there is work then ongoing, and I would want to give committee the reassurance that the senior leadership group are looking at all of these different issues, and they will feed into much of the other work that we do. So the question about housing was a very relevant one, for example, which Councillor Bunty raised. But if you take that, our strategy is feeding into the work that our housing officers, for example, do when they go out to housing visits, when they meet with tenants, which they do on an annual basis. And it's about looking how we can support them, how we can direct them, and how we can also help with any isolation issues. There's still a lot of work to do. That's really clear. That we wouldn't have this strategy if there wasn't a lot of work to do. But that's what we're now working on. And it's really important that right across the council, we continue to do that work collectively to ensure that we do the best for our communities in this area.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Mr. Kettrick. Do you want to add anything particularly about the transport, etc.?
Thanks, Convener.
SPR was also mentioned.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. In terms of the 20-minute neighbourhoods that's embedded in the Scottish Government's National Planning Framework, both the local transport strategy and the active travel strategy, which sit alongside the anti-poverty strategy, 20-minute neighbourhoods are referred to, and it'll take more than improvements to local transport networks to create those 20-minute neighbourhoods. The concept is to better align things like spatial planning, so that walking, wheeling, cycling and public transport are all more accessible. And then to touch on the thing mentioned in terms of the SPR, we've put an awful lot of effort into community empowerment to try and help support communities to take on those assets which we simply can't afford to retain, and hopefully the fruits of that are starting to come through. We have 40 odd asset transfer expressions of interest that are being progressed, and we hope that that work continues. But it is a challenge. Everybody recognises that, but as Cam has highlighted, has been mentioned by other, this is a cross-council approach to dealing with anti-poverty strategy, as it is in delivering a lot of our strategies. It needs a corporate approach.
Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. I don't know who this will be for. With regard to on page 25, and it's talking about school clothing grants, free school meal awards. How will that affect when we go to all primary school children receiving free school meals.
Okay, John, well, first of all, welcome as it's your first meeting as director, and you've been kind of thrown right in there. So,
absolutely. I mean, I suppose it depends on what the plans are for the national rollout and the funding that will come nationally to Falkirk for that. It's something I don't have the detail of just now, but I can obviously find out that for you and report back.
And just it's highlighting that's contributing to the poverty. So will that exacerbate it or will it help it? You know, we've not got the answer now, John. I'm just
I mean there's particular criteria for young people and families when they're able to access clothing grants and FME, but there's also a lot of other work that goes on in schools with PEF funding, with CEF funding, around cost of the school day, that schools implement locally outside the allocation of clothing grants and FME, but I'll certainly look into the detail of that and get back to you.
okay, James, I think Sally's maybe got something to add.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to come in on that one as well, and just say I think as previously as the universal provision of free school meals has rolled out, obviously that removes the need for individual families to apply for free school meals, which I think overall is a good thing, and it kind of takes away from, you know, some of the stigma. And I know there's been a huge amount of work within schools as well around removing that whole stigma from free school meals, so it's far less of an issue these days. But I think overall the provision of the free school meals, universal free school meals, it actually supports, because it just makes it easier for kids to get that free school meal. It does leave us where we need to do a bit more around promoting our clothing grant as well, to make sure that the kids that are getting the universal provision of free school meals are not missing out on that clothing grant entitlement. But you know, I think again we've got, you know, great links into schools, and schools are generally quite you know, aware of who might benefit from that and can help with some of that promotion and things. So yes, I think overall it is actually a really helpful policy in terms of supporting people in poverty.
Thanks. Next question. How many children are in Falkirk?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if we will have that actual figure. Sally, do you have it from your sources?
I don't have a figure in front of me. I would say it must be around 23,000, but I can double check and get back. I don't have a figure in front of me, I'm afraid.
The only reason I'm asking for is we're saying there's 1 in 4 children in poverty. I'd just like to know what the amount of that actually means. Fine, I can get that offline, Sally. Next question is with regards to the free, talk about transport, the free bus pass for under 22s. How many now have taken up the offer?
Yeah, I don't know. Have you might not have that figure to hand?
I mean, I don't have the figure to hand, but I know that we got figures in fairly recently from Scottish Government, and it did show an increase in the uptake, albeit on the back of that, we put further guidance out to schools to further encourage that uptake, and also to our CLD colleagues to make sure that as many pupils as possible, but we can get that figure for you.
Okay. It's saying in the report that people who are in poverty, and it's a fact that a lot of people who work are in poverty, but it says that the middle earners come into that category. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So is there a figure that somebody would need to make or earn that classes them in poverty or not in poverty?
Okay, I'll go to Sally because she'll be able to explain the measure that it's used to define whether someone's in poverty or not.
Yeah, it's to do with how their household income sits with the average or the median household income across the rest of the UK. It's not actually average, because average, when we've got some super earners, completely skews it. So it's medium income, and households are classed as being in relative poverty when their income is 60% of contemporary medium income. So that means that they're not then kind of able to keep pace with what the rest of society is doing. So that's the kind of the level for the classification of living in poverty. The one we tend to talk about is relative poverty. There is also an absolute poverty as well, but throughout the strategy we've talked about relative poverty, which is 60% of median income.
Sally, do we have a figure for that average medium income?
I don't know what the exact figure is for what that income would be, but it's kind of household income, so it's not. It then comes into what's the makeup of your household and things as well. So there is no, there'd be a different figure for a single person household than there would for a family of 2 adults, 2 kids.
Okay, that was clear as mud.
I'm happy to follow up with some more detailed figures.
I think that might be helpful, Sally, just to allow people to understand, what that level is, because I think everybody in the room will be looking at what's my household income and where does that sit with the median. But absolutely, it depends on the makeup of a family, and you may not fit into one of those kind of groupings, but you will be able to get a feel from what those groupings will be.
Yeah, exactly. And probably last question, I think it's important, and numerous colleagues that have mentioned it, and officers as well, regarding housing. Housing's a massive part of this strategy, and how we can help with the strategy. I think what comes to one dimension about networking as well, if we're allowing or not allowing our children and young people to network with their peers, it makes it hard. In my belief, it makes it harder for them to get on. So, but especially the housing, I think the housing needs to be a big focus in this strategy. I think I had a conversation with the convener yesterday regarding, in Falkirk, we have agreed housing for 11,000 houses over the year, and it sits at it now, and we're delivering 400. How can that help? We're not delivering the right amount of housing for our people in Falkirk, because it's not just about, which is an important part, about the condition of the properties that we have in Falkirk, but it's also important to have the variety of housing, because it's mentioned there, overcrowding. I've got a case at the moment where families, mother and father and 7 children, where can we put them? It gets to a stage where we didn't have the properties to keep these families going, so they then struggle. So I think the housing bit, Sally, is very, very important, as many the colleagues have already mentioned. So I would like that to be seen as much a priority in this strategy as the rest of it. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Baillie Kerr. Mrs. Algie, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, the importance of housing is essential for anyone, poverty otherwise, to have a safe and secure home. That's the foundations of having good quality well-being, etc. Our local housing strategy, which members see every year, covers a lot of this, and it also considers every aspect of poverty when we're doing that. That in turn then influences our housing investment strategy, where we have around 350 million over a 5-year period directed at ensuring we have good quality housing and new builds, etc. If we could do more, we absolutely would, but we do what we can within that budget, and that budget is absolutely directed about providing additional property where we can through our new build programme, but equally making sure that we maintain the properties we've got. And I think it's around 90% of our properties meet energy efficiency standards, and that has a big impact on poverty as well. So it's that type of work that we absolutely need to keep on top of to make sure that we are tackling all of the issues that Sally has outlined in this particular strategy.
I would also maybe just ask if Mr. Keswick's in a position to make any comment about LDP3 and the housing supply.
Convener, thank you. It's LDP3 would sit with Michael McGuinness as opposed to myself. However, I can comment that there has been established a working group to look at growth, in particular around residential development. In particular, it's widely recognised that having high levels of house building can improve the affordability of housing, although Falkirk is recognised today as one of the lowest places to acquire a home, especially for a first-time buyer. However, it's also recognised that development, particularly through housing development, can deliver economic output and growth, employment, and with it being targeted at set locations, can improve placemaking and reverse areas long-term decline. In addition to that, when you have a variety of stock, it can make more quality housing available for an older population, which means that you have then that mobility within the housing market, which again impacts health and social care positively, and it can also generate and free up a more efficient use of housing stock. So again, there is benefits in all of that, and that is why that group's been set up and established, is to progress that active approach through the next iteration of the LDP, which will be LDP3. But it is a long process to go through, and it needs many partners to work collaboratively, including the private sector, to bring those opportunities forward.
I apologise to Mr. McGuinness. I didn't realise he was on the call. Michael, I don't know if there's anything else you would want to add.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. No, just as Paul highlighted, we're going through the LDP process, gathering the evidence. We have been a working group of officers looking at the growth potential we have across the council area. We've also got to recognise there's been a lot of stalled sites, so sites we have anticipated for housing development has not happened. So we have to look at deliverability, how many houses we actually believe will be coming forward over the next number of years to the LDP process. So officers are working right across various service areas, looking at the housing we can develop and build, in particularly the private sector. Clearly, what pieces of land we believe would be appropriate to release to ensure we, convert as much of our brownfield sites into housing developments as possible. But in other cases, what potential land releases we may consider going forward for housing developers. But yeah, as a number of members have highlighted today, housing is really key in terms of providing good property stock for our communities. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Michael. There are no further indications to speak. Therefore, are we happy to approve the strategy and allow it to go forward to the Community Planning Partnership for our partners' support as well? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next item, which is the boundary Scotland second review of the Scottish Parliament boundaries and the publication of the revised proposals. And I'll go to Mr. Lawrie.
Yes, thank you, Convener. So this report provides members with an outline of the revised proposals for the Scottish parliamentary constituencies for the Falkirk Council area, following the commencement of Boundary Scotland's 1-month period of public consultation. And also seeks to agree a council response for submission to Boundary Scotland. The deadline is the 15th of May, that's tomorrow, that 1 month period is fixed in legislation, but we have approached Boundaries Scotland, and given the time of this meeting, we've requested a short extension, and it's been agreed by Boundaries Scotland we can submit our response on the 16th of May. So we do have a 24-hour extension, but I think in the context of finalising our response, that short extension is nonetheless helpful. So Boundaries Scotland started its second review of the Scottish Parliament constituencies in 2023, consulting on its provisional proposals initially from the 17th of May to the 17th of June last year. Now, at that stage, the initial proposals from Boundaries Scotland was to retain the status quo. Therefore, the current constituencies of Falkirk East and Falkirk West. That seemed like a very good solution proposal from our perspective, and we made no representations at that stage. However, what we now have before us at the second stage of the process are really very significant changes to the proposals for the Falkirk area as set out at paragraph 4.3, with Falkirk split across the three constituencies, the three proposed constituencies as set out, and they're also maps of these proposals as Appendix 1. And at paragraph 4.5 of the report, we've set out the factors which Boundaries Scotland is entitled to consider in terms of developing and finalising its proposals. So we've considered these from an officer perspective, and really for us there's three standout observations we'd make. Firstly, the fact that we think it's regrettable that Falkirk Council is split over three constituencies, particularly when the initial proposal suggested no change, and actually Falkirk, as a result of its size, is particularly well suited to being divided into two constituencies, two complete constituencies. That has been the pattern since the inception of the Scottish Parliament. These constituencies are well understood and recognised by voters. I think secondly, the proposed Cumbernauld and Kilsyth constituency raises issues in relation to the matter of local ties, which is meant to be one of the issues that Boundaries Scotland take into consideration, and the splitting of Ward 3, Denny and Banknock, and the introduction of a new cross-boundary arrangement with another local authority. These are not matters that we would support. There is no obvious community link between Denny and North Lanarkshire, and nor is there rationale for splitting Ward 3 at all clear, and existing polling districts are split in this process. And the third observation is set out paragraph 4.8 is that both the proposed Falkirk North and Linlithgow and Falkirk South constituencies include the name of current council wards, which I think is also a matter which might increase the risk of voter confusion, which I think is probably already significant, not least given the changes to the Westminster constituencies as well. Paragraphs 4.9 and 4.10 just set out some of the more administrative implications of these new proposals, which are not insignificant from the purpose in terms of how we run and organise elections locally. And then finally, at paragraph 4.11, the officer's suggestion is that the council's primary position should be that it objects to these proposals. But as a reserve position, in the event that the proposals are retained, we would suggest that alternative names are suggested. Really, two elements to that. One is that the Falkirk North and South names, I think, cause some confusion and don't sit naturally with the geographies of the proposed constituencies. And secondly, that Denny should be reflected in the name of the proposed Cumbernauld and Kilsyth constituency. But I think it's important that our response very much objects to the proposals, and this is the point about the names is very much a reserve position. So members may have other comments in addition to those set out, which can be taken into account in finalising a response. And it's perhaps just worth also saying that depending on the responses to this consultation stage, Boundary Scotland may propose another 1 month consultation on further proposals later in 2024. And then all of this needs to be fed into the reconsideration of the regional arrangements, which will also be considered later this year. And the final recommendations for both constituencies and regions must be submitted to the Scottish Parliament in May 2025. So I think, Convener, that covers the main elements of the report, and the recommendations are at section 2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawrie, and I therefore assume that the intention would be to take comments from today's meeting along with some of the narrative within the report, and that would form a letter that would then go to the Boundary Commission from the Council in time for the deadline. Yeah. Okay, I can't disagree with anything that the Chief Exec has said, in that I think it's absolutely important that Falkirk seems to have been squeezed by the rest of the country, and we have been split into 3 different parts, and therefore natural links with communities have been broken, and will indeed create huge amount of voter confusion and potentially an apathy to then actually go out and vote, because you're unsure of what constituency you may be in or who may be your candidate because of the historical nature of that. I think we've got each of the parts of Falkirk that are on the periphery to both east and the west will be tagged on to other constituencies that where they're going to probably be very isolated because there is no natural ties, etc. And then there comes a confusion of having to work with several health boards, as well as a plethora of MPs, MSPs, and indeed our regional colleagues as well, which, from the point of view of Falkirk as a local authority, will be challenging. There's no doubt about that, having to deal across. Also, just that the local offices will have, of those will have challenges as well in doing that. And the UN has circulated an addendum, and that is perfectly sensible to accept that we should not be looking to split electoral wards, as that again would add a further complication in trying to deal with information to voters about who and where they were voting, and would make certainly the management aspect much easier if indeed these proposals go forward. But I think we should have a very much a focus on the objection that we don't agree with this. We want to have the 2 constituencies of Falkirk East and Falkirk West retained, and if only if that is not going to be a consideration, then there's some other things around the periphery, such as the electoral position out in the west, Banknock, etc. The names, Kilsyth and Cumbernauld, need to include Denny as it is a significant area of population, but also the confusion that will be created with the Falkirk North name of the ward, with the Falkirk North Council ward, and similarly the Linlithgow and Falkirk South does not actually reflect where the Falkirk part is, as it's not really to the south per se of, certainly not to the south of Falkirk, and that would really need to be made clear. There'll be a huge amount of work required if these proposals go through, in order to actually ensure that people know that where they're voting, and who they'll be voting for at that point. So I'm more than happy that we put in a letter of objection, and would encourage as many others to do likewise. I'm happy to agree with that report, and I'll open it up.
Convener, I would actually like to ask for a short recess to discuss this addendum. I feel the addendum possibly splits my ward up even more than it is now. So I would like 5 minutes, if that is at all possible, to discuss.
Okay, I'm happy to give that 5 minutes if you want to give that consideration. Perhaps Mr. Moody, you might want to assist with that.
Can I maybe just ask a question before we do that?
Okay.
Kenneth, do we know why the Boundary Commission actually changed its position, its original position?
I mean, the Boundary Commission papers sent out in response suggests that there were a number of objections to the initial proposals, and what they've now put together is a response to these objections. I think that the thing which I find slightly strange is that one would anticipate that the major changes would be set out in the initial consultation, and the latter consultation might then involve some fine-tuning. But what we've seen is that the proposals set out in the second consultation are actually much more extensive and wide-ranging right across the central belt of Scotland than what we saw in the initial consultation. That just seems, to my mind, a rather strange way of doing things. So the reasons are set out, the objections that were received, West Lothian, Edinburgh, and Clydesdale as well, all of these impacted and resulted in these new proposals, but it does seem a rather counterintuitive way of going about things.
Okay, if we can have a 10-minute recess, I would rather that we took the recess and then came back.
It's just to offer some information on kind of what Councillor Garner was saying, and I just wanted to point out, because I think these proposals are a burach and I'm not for them, but as things currently stand, the ward which Councillor Bowes and I share, we have our ward is split in terms of Falkirk East and West, with our main street of Stennismuir right through, and I would have potentially looked at a further amendment where the current proposals include skin flats in the in the kind of main, so that Ward 4 is all together. But actually, I don't know how the other Grangemouth councillors feel. Actually, in terms of separating skin flats from Grangemouth in a parliamentary, I think it would probably be better that it went back in with whatever constituency Grangemouth is in because of the community ties. And it's just to offer that as a, that is very difficult to. The current wards are split in the present proposal, and it's very difficult finding a way that also respects that as well and still makes sense, So I just wanted to offer that before you go to your recess.
We want Grangemouth back. We want skin flats back in Grangemouth. Give us skin flats back.
I love skin flats in our ward, but at the same time, just from the point of view of common sense on these proposals, I'm not sure it does make sense, but then nothing does in this proposal. So.
That may be a step too far in actually being able to get an agreement. So I just think we have to be mindful of that, as that change has happened, and that therefore voters are aware of that. Okay, 10 minutes. Are we ready to go?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, colleagues, can we come back, please? The Director of Children's Services, or I think it's actually Director of Education now, isn't it? Sorry, has got an update in relation to the NEC cards. But we'll just take before we start, and then we'll go back into the debate.
Okay, thanks, Convener. This was just in relation to be the Kerr's question about the uptake for travel cards in Falkirk. Within the senior phase, so within S4, S5, S6 pupils, it's up in the high 90s. So 99% of 17-year-olds, 99% of 16-year-olds, 94% of 15-year-olds. It's slightly lower in the age groups below that, and the lowest information that we've got is with 12-year-olds, where it's sitting at 63% at the moment. But you can imagine that that's probably because it's the kind of older pupils that will be travelling around, taking up that entitlement. So it's very high. And across the piece, how does it relate compared to Falkirk? Well, between 12 to 17-year-olds in Falkirk, it's 81%, and in Scotland, it's 87%. But that push needs to come from getting more first years to take up their entitlement, and there's plans in place between CLD and schools from P7 and S1 to address that. But in the senior phase, it's very, very high.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, but we're really not going back into the debate unless it's a very quick question, Councillor Spears.
Do they still need a citizenship card first?
We've simplified the arrangements for applying in school, and that's why there's been an uptake. So even between January this year and March this year, there's been an increase. So we simplified it. The identity's got to be confirmed, so we've simplified what the process is, and schools are assisting families to get that.
It's greatly increased our workload. Who's got to do the justification?
Okay, if we can go back into the debate, and I'll ask Ewan to perhaps move his amendment first.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. And I want to be clear that I absolutely agree on the general objection articulated in the report in the reserve position considering the names. It's frustrating that the initial proposals that would have retained two representatives across the council area has now been altered to the effect of altering the boundaries irrationally, especially from my perspective in Ward 3, without clear ties to the area that they will share representation with under this proposal. An addendum seeks to highlight the acute impacts this will have on the village of Banknock if this proposal will be retained by the Boundaries Commission, above what is already rightly contained within the general objection. My colleague, Councillor Kelly, first read the proposal. He was keen to follow the examples of Councillors Hogan and McKechnie, who in 1974 travelled to Westminster to successfully make their objection known to a proposal to split Banknock between Strathclyde and Central Regional Councils, as was proposed. If these proposals are retained, I know Alf is keen to get his ticket booked down there if he feels it necessary. I'm going to read from a statement from my colleague, Councillor Kelly. Banknock is an embedded part of the Falkirk and the Forth Valley. NHS services organised as Forth Valley and education within Falkirk Council. Well, my objection is generally to the alteration of the representation. If the boundaries are proposed are retained, I wish to articulate the acute impacts this will have on the people of Banknock. Banknock is integrated with the Hags and Longcroft communities, sharing bus routes, public services, shops, and the same community hall that serves as the polling place, appropriately to the east of the village and subsequently more accessible to the people of Hags and Longcroft. The 2024 polling scheme approved by Falkirk Council did not vary the boundaries of polling district FW325, which will be split under this proposal between two constituencies. Further, the division of the community from Bonnybridge that is always shared assets and services with will be difficult, confusing and acutely impactful on the people of Banknock. The GP clinic is a satellite of the Bonnybridge clinic and with multiple issues currently reported in accessing local health services reported by constituents. This creates an acutely concerning overlap of accountability and representation. The bus route that services Banknock goes directly to Falkirk, where the current constituency MSP has an office. Well, to access the current Cumbernauld and Kilsyth MSP, this would require a bus transfer or a transfer onto a train to access their MSP's office centred in Cumbernauld. As a local member of the council and a long-standing resident of Banknock, I ask for the boundaries of this community not to be butchered in the way proposed, and if the Commission decides to retain its broad intentions to alter the boundaries across the Falkirk Council area, the Banknock is appropriately realigned into the indicatively named Falkirk North. So that's from Councillor Kelly. I move the addendum as circulated. unsure if I need to read it out, but I believe everybody has it circulated, that if the current proposals are retained, that the council adopts a further reserved position that the village of Banknock should be in the new Falkirk North constituency instead of the Cumbernauld and Kilsyth constituency. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo?
Yeah, I'm just happy to formally second and reserve the right to come in again
Okay.
if need be.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Grandad.
Thank you. I agree with almost everything that you said and some of the stuff that came from Councillor Kelly as well. What I don't agree with, unfortunately, is the addendum. And I'll tell you just in short why I don't agree with the addendum. This addendum signals out Banknock, and that's Denny, Dunny Pace, Fancotton Head, Immune, Denlon Head, all with massive ties to Banknock, Hags and Longcroft as well. This addendum further isolates these communities. I'm not going to support an addendum which affects the ward and its communities as much as this does. Banknock probably has the most links with Kilsyth, Croy and Croy through many family links and the distance it has, but I fully support Banknock staying with the rest of the Ward 3 communities. We need to work together and to keep local ties and not cut them. So that's how I can't support the addendum, and I still stick with the recommendations contained within the report.
Okay, thank you. Any other person? Comment? Okay, we will go to, sorry, Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, convener. I had a comment, but it's not in direct reference to the addendum. So is it better to do it now or after?
I'm happy to take comments and then we can move to the vote.
Okay, thank you. My observations with this, when I first glanced at them, actually focused on the east of the proposals, because currently Linlithgow is in the Lothian list region, whereas Falkirk East is within the central regional list, and therefore these proposed constituencies actually split the current regional list system. And we're talking about the new proposed Cumbernauld and Kilsyth seats would have 3 council areas, but the regional list, if it were to be within the equivalent of Lothians, would have been operating with Falkirk Council, West Lothian, East Lothian and Edinburgh Council, if I've not missed any. And that in itself is just a gigantic workload for any regional MSP. And whilst the proposed regions are yet to come out, there is a good chance that Falkirk South and Linlithgow and Falkirk South will be in the Lothians, again splitting Falkirk in terms of the regional list. And I think in our contribution it'd be good to highlight that not only does this risk splitting Falkirk into 3 with different council areas within those 3 constituencies, but also the regional lists threaten to split Falkirk, again creating an administrative nightmare.
Yeah, certainly. Mr. Moody's going to come in.
I think it's maybe worth emphasising, convener, that the regional list process will follow on from this once it's clear what the constituency boundaries will be. But I think Councillor Bundy makes a very helpful point just in highlighting that there is an implication for the regional lists too. I think my own assessment would be that it's more likely that if Linlithgow and Falkirk South survives in a constituency, it would move into central Scotland. Partly because the population growth in Lothian is significantly higher than elsewhere. And I think Lothian as a list probably has to shed some areas to maintain the parity of population between regional lists. But the risk does arise that the constituency would move into Lothian, and likewise there is at least a possibility that Cumbernauld and Kilsyth might move to a different region in the form of West, though probably more likely that it would stay in Central.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowes?
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about this and the amendment itself. Problem is you're dealing here with the Electoral Commission. And the Electoral Commission, as I think Councillor Murtagh had suggested earlier on, doesn't really care about council wards, given that the Caskinerd and Tries is split right through Main Street. North of that is Falkirk West, south of that is Falkirk East. So I just don't see any sense in the amendment, because they won't change it, because they don't look at council wards that way. They don't look at communities that way. And as much as I appreciate the amendment getting in, I don't see any sense in backing something that ultimately the Electoral Commission will just ignore.
Councillor Kerr, Bailey Kerr, sorry.
Thanks, Convener. So leading on from what Councillor Bowes just said there, so we object, and we wholeheartedly object to the proposals. What will the objection to the Commission, what weight will that have in the decision of the Commission? And do we think it will do anything or change, or do we only think it's got to change the names back to what it should have been?
Kenneth, do you want to make comment on that? Colin, do you want?
Well, I mean, I was simply going to say that I don't think we know the answer to that, because after all, the objections that came as part of the phase 1 process then had a very significant influence on what followed. So I think that we need to focus on our primary objection and try and reverse that. But whether that will then have weight with Boundary Scotland, I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And it might also depend on what other councils and what other groups, what their submissions are as well. I don't know if Colin wants to add to that.
Yeah. Colin, do you want to come in?
I think one significant factor to take into account is a formal objection by a local authority, and that would be what follows if the executive agrees to the recommendation, causes a public local inquiry to be held. So that will give an opportunity to enlarge more on this and to make clear that the primary position is that the two constituencies as they are should be retained. So there will that opportunity to expand on what's being said. So I think Kenneth makes a good point too, in the fact that the second set of recommendations are so different from the first, I think largely arises from the objections and other local inquiries. So at the very least, I think it's helpful that Falkirk has the opportunity to balance those submissions that have already been made. Ultimately, it's in the discretion of the Commission as to what they recommend. And the hard fact is that they have to balance up the need to have electoral quotas, which are broadly similar across the country, and that isn't easy to do without breaching some local authority boundaries. So there should be an opportunity for this council to have the opportunity to say this isn't the right solution.
I have a supplementary question then. Do we know how many objected at the first stage?
Kenneth, did you have an indication of that?
We do. There were the consultation, and this is set out in the document released by Boundary Scotland, which Dale Robb shared with members on just the other day. So from Edinburgh, Prestonpans, Kilmarnock, Clydebank, Johnson, East Renfrewshire. And as a result, there were 6 local inquiries to gather further views and proposals in Musselburgh, Kilmarnock, Clydebank, Johnson, Newton Burns, Edinburgh, and Peebles. So that was the feedback, and these were the consequences of that feedback at stage 1, which then led to the second stage proposals.
I'm just scared that it's only us that make this wholeheartedly support the objection going in. But if it's only us that put an objection in and everybody else has got theirs sorted, will they listen to one authority the same as they did for 6 or 7? That's my only theory. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Billy Kerr. Councillor Murtagh?
Thanks. I mean, I wholeheartedly support us putting in an official objection, and I think that regardless of whether it will have significant weight or not, it's the correct course of action, and it's something that we have to try to push and to do. Just following on my earlier points and what Councillor Boyce was saying now, I think all I would say is that when we make the submission, that although in an ideal world I would say that absolutely I would want the principle that all of the wards, all of a ward should be contained within a constituency, that we don't like we are saying in our submission that we want to go back to the status quo. We want to go back to the position that the boundaries are just now, and that obviously that is not the case within the current position. So it's just in terms of our argument that we don't say, well, you know, that we put the two things together, that we want to go back to the present state, but that also all of the wards should be contained within a boundary, because we don't currently have that. And where I think it is particularly concerning as well that we illustrate the situation which we now have with the upcoming Westminster boundaries, where, you know, we're further splitting communities and creating confusion, and that should also be taken into account. So I just want us to ensure that we, like, personally, I don't think that the current boundaries are suitable, and I don't like them from a point of view of, you know, the way that they work. But I understand that for the council, and like as you say, convener, that constituents are somewhat used to the situation which we have in Ward 4, but it's not ideal, and I would have liked to see it amended. But it's just that when we put our submission in as a council, it would be good to try to reflect that situation, that what's currently there is not exactly perfect. So let's not put that in the way that our submission is in terms of the text. Thanks, convener.
Okay. I see no further contributions. So maybe Mr. Moody can clarify the position between the vote of the motion and the amendment.
Yes, thank you, convener. Happy to do that. And the motion consists of the recommendations as they are set out within the report. So that would be confirming that the council would object on the basis of the factors set out within the report, against which there is the amendment which will add an additional reserve position to say that if the proposals were to proceed, that Banknock should not transfer to Cumbernauld and Kilsyth, but should instead stay in the indicative Falkirk North constituency. So just to take that then to the vote, convener, the motion which is moved by you and seconded by Councillor Garner, as described as the recommendations, against which there's the amendment moved by Councillor Steenbank and seconded by Councillor Nimmo, which has been circulated. Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Bundy.
Motion.
Councillor Deacon.
Motion.
Councillor Garner.
The motion.
Councillor Hannah.
Amendment.
Bailey Kerr.
Motion.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Motion.
Councillor Murtagh.
Motion.
Councillor Nimmo.
Amendment.
Councillor Patterson.
Amendment.
Councillor Spears.
Amendment.
Councillor Steenbank.
Amendment.
There are 7 votes for the motion and 5 votes for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you. That now brings us to the end of this morning's executive. Just thank everybody for their contributions and their attendance. Thank you.